Good afternoon and welcome to a special workshop meeting of the Oak Harbor City Council. Today is March 5th and I'd like to call the meeting to order. It is 1 p.m. and the meeting is scheduled to go until 3 p.m. And I'd like to go around the table and introduce those here with us and welcome everyone else. So, Councilor?
Oh, yes. Councilmember Erica Wassinger, and I just want to tell everyone that my youngest daughter is very, very sick. She's actually at the doctor right now, and my husband's calling me. I wanted to make sure that she was okay, so I'm going to step out just for a minute and take that. But you guys go on, and I'll be right back.
Jim Wiesner, council member.
Kathy Rosen, Public Works Director.
Joe Stowell, City Engineer.
Patricia Soul, Finance Director.
Bill Larson, council member.
Rick Almberg, councilman.
And I'm Bob Severance, Mayor. So we have actually one item on our agenda, and that is wastewater treatment plant update. And I think our city engineer, Joe Stoll, will be handling most of that, and that's scheduled to go somewhere around an hour or so. Maybe
Mayor, council members, thanks for having me here today. You'll notice the packet that I handed out is pretty healthy. I've got about 80 slides lined up in there. A lot to explain, but it's all good information. I did try and trim it back, believe it or not, and I still ended up somewhere in that range. With that in mind, that's why I did the handout with place to take notes. What I'm hopeful we'll be able to do is allow me to get through the presentation and take what notes you might have. And with any luck, as I go through the presentation, I'll answer those questions. And when we get to the end, we'll circle back around, and I can take any questions that you might have at that point. And that way we might be able to blast through all the points in the time frame that we have. I didn't put this presentation together in a vacuum. I may be the guy sitting here talking to you, but I had a lot of help. I had a lot of help from our staff and from our consultant team and our contractor. And I don't know if everybody really realizes, but there's over 100 laborers working down there on the project site, plus all the management staff that goes along with it that have a lot of pride in this job and the work that they do. And I'm the guy that gets to sit here and tell you all about it. So with that, I'm going to move forward. Going to go through just a real brief summary of the project. Why are we even sitting here today? Why is it important? And then I'm going to dig into the clean water facility and talk about the city council questions that came up at an earlier meeting. Get into the GCCM, just a brief overview of what that is about and how that's worked for this project. Touch on the schedule and current project cost estimates and funding for that. And at some point, I'm sure Patricia will give me a nudge when she wants to talk to a few slides. Otherwise, I might just keep going. Then we'll sum that up, talk about rates, and then just brush over Windjammer Park Phase 1, because it does relate to the clean water facility, but it's also a topic for another day as well. And then we'll get into next steps and what we're going to do moving forward. So project summary. Back in 2008, we did our sewer comp plan that led to a requirement on our NPDES permit to have a facilities plan online in 2013. And we did that. We finished the facilities plan, adopted it, and then we started working towards where we're going to put this treatment plant. At that point, we had 55 some odd acres. Where in that 55 some odd acres are we going to put the plant? There was a property available for sale, would allow us to move it further out of the park and build adjacent to the existing treatment plant. And in 2015, construction began, and the real kickoff was at the in November of 2015 when we had the groundbreaking. But we'd already started some procurement and excavation at that time. So that's the nutshell where we've been. City council questions, and we watched the video numerous times trying to make sure we captured everything. And I think we got it, at least from that particular meeting. So what caused the estimate of 121 to be underestimated? Please reconcile and outline the budgets for GMPs 10 through 13. What was the reference to $2 million over the budget in GMP 11? How are we going to pay for the increase in cost? How will bonding affect our debt ratios and bond ratings going forward? How will taking more loans affect our debt ratios and credit ratings? Will it take longer to repay the loans? Going forward, we want to see more information, and it's basically broke down in the chart. And how are we using the contingencies? What's the plan going forward to make sure we keep a tight rein on costs? When have we presented costs to the City Council in the past? And then as often as we give a report, make sure all costs are included and described. What will the monthly rate be, if known? And finally, how will work in Windjammer Park affect events? That's a lot. I'm not going to go through these one by one because as I go through the presentation, you'll find that these get answered. And if need be, at the end of the presentation or individually later, we can go through each one of these point by point, and we have an answer for every one of them. So moving on to GCCM. What is it? It's different. It's just an alternative to design, bid, build. That's the typical method that we have to use by state law is design, bid, build, low bidder. It's allowed for certain projects, only projects that are over $10 million. The sum they allow for underneath that if it's a special circumstance. But you have to actually go and apply to the state committee to be approved to use GCCM on a project. And I actually happen to sit on that committee now. Guaranteed maximum price, we say that a lot. That's the same thing as GMP. And it is not a change order. It is an amendment to the contract for the scope, for the scope of work that we intended to do. It's one of the reasons why GCCM works so well is because it adds that level of flexibility to a project. So why did we choose GCCM? Well, there were a number of things. We had concerns about cultural resources in the area. At the time we were starting this project, we were on the heels of Pioneer Way, and we'd done some other work in the park on a 42-inch outfall. It was upmost on our list. GCCM would give us that flexibility to find those, discover any cultural resources early and accommodate them with having the least impact on construction schedule. Another really cool part of GCCM was early equipment procurement, and what that means is we were able to buy the big parts early and secure the price and design around them. We had some complex site conditions between the location and the soil conditions and the cultural resources. The GCCM is a perfect fit for that type of a project. And ultimately, we're looking for a better value for the city. It's a combination, because in a design, bid, build environment, you have to select the low bid and you get the contractor you get. With GCCM, you're able to select a contractor based on their qualifications and experience, and then work with that contractor moving forward. So the price is part of that. They negotiate a fee early, but the real benefit of it is you have that contractor involved from square one to provide feedback. And that leads to the ability to manage project risk sooner. So, for example, if you find some unforeseen site condition that you can't work around, you got your contractor right there. You can adjust on the fly and make it work, as opposed to in a design bid build world, you would have to do a change order and renegotiate that work with your contractor. With GCCM, you may not have even contracted that part of the work or can add it on at a later time. So this is the same thing effectively graphically. So in a traditional world, you'd do design, we'd put it out to bid, and then you'd build it. So it's a very linear process. GCCM, you design, well, geez, at about 15 to 30% design, you bring on the contractors. So they're immediately providing value engineering and feedback. And you're able to start building portions of that you have certainty of. That's what allowed us to do the deep excavation before we had, once we had the footprint, we didn't even have the structural finished, but we had the footprint for where the deep excavation needed to go, allowed us to get that contracted and started. Has it worked? I'd like to say that it has. I mean, I don't want to say overpromise, underdeliver, or anything like that. But in this particular project, we have an amazing team down there at the project site. It's allowed us to do the site excavation early, like I stated before, and the deep excavation. One of the big deals that came up is we were able to put a deposit on a crane ahead of time and hold it right before Seattle became the city with the most tower cranes in the country. If we hadn't have done that and made that reservation early through using a GCCM, it would have been an entirely different environment down there. We wouldn't have had the Christmas lights, let's put it that way. May not have had a tower crane. It also, in working with GCCM, we identified that installing the odor control in the yard itself was going to be rather complicated, and so we started looking outside the yard. And by using the GCCM process, we were able to negotiate that work and come up with a different plan and work with our design team to make it happen. I know this, if we'd have followed this other route, the top one, design, bid, build, we wouldn't have been going out to bid until like now for any of it, because we didn't have finished plans until the end of December. So imagine that hot Seattle market that we've seen affecting the entire project. So it also allowed us, one of the interesting things is because we were able to provide design in phases and construction in phases, we were able to span our applications for state revolving fund loans over multiple years, so that we had 4 different shots at that. So one thing that's incredibly unique about this project amongst any other GCCM project in the state is we were the very first to be awarded what they call heavy civil, which is negotiated work with the contractor. So work that the contractor would normally do, the general contractor would normally do, we were able to negotiate that work with them, and the state allows for it. And we were the first one to be allowed to do that. We chose to do that on a couple different things. One was the membranes, ultraviolet disinfection, and the biosolids dryer. Huge for the project. Those pieces of equipment are so different in size, shape, and form and function that if you didn't have those picked out early, you'd have to have a design that accommodated 3 completely different widgets. And so we did that very early in the project with the membrane and UV, and then a little bit later with the dryer. And then, as I state there, then it allows our ladder engineering team to design around one product, one piece of equipment. So dealing in a tight physical environment where we wanted to minimize the footprint, we were able to do that. And then first off, I have to give Hoffman kudos for, we really grilled them hard on the first concrete self-perform package. I mean, that was really interesting. And this touches a little bit on how we manage project cost. Concrete's a really good one because you have a defined quantity, 12,000, 13,000 yards of concrete, and you have a defined amount of rebar. So really what you're dealing with is labor. So we worked really hard with Hoffman to develop a way to measure that. So how many, a man-loaded schedule. So how many pours are you going to do this week, next week? How many man-hours is it going to take to form that up and move on to the next one? How many yards? And then we had this metric where we checked in on a regular basis to make sure that we were getting what we were paid for. We were paying receipts plus labor and a fee on top of that. And with that, we were able to track it down to the bucket. It was pretty spectacular, really. When we got on to the next later GMP, we didn't have any bids on concrete work. We actually, after having some success with doing that on an earlier package, we put the concrete work out to bid and didn't get any bids. So he says, well, heck, we had pretty good luck last time. Let's try it again. And it's worked for us. The admin framing, we used it for that. We received no bids twice. We put it out for bid twice and got no bids. So we worked with Hoffman to negotiate that work, and we brought in some local labor, and they have done an amazing job down there. The workmanship is incredible. We were just talking about it the other day, just a sidebar. You know how normally if you're going to run a pipe through drywall, if you were a fast contractor, you might just jab it through or hit it with a hammer. These guys cut the hole nice and clean. Quality work, pride in workmanship. And that's going to mean something for us in the long run. So schedule, it's really brief, just a couple of slides. This slide here is really more so than anything intended to show we're 7-8 months pregnant. We're near the end. This has been a long haul. I started here in 2010, and one of the first public meetings I went to was on this project. And so I've been following this thing along for quite some time, and we are close to the finish line. This slide is intended to show how all the GMP amendments have accumulated and worked towards that common goal. And you can see, final startup, they're all leading up towards that finish line. And where that red line is right now, we wouldn't have even started. No, I think I got it even highlighted on there. If it was design bid build, we wouldn't have even started until that point. I mean, that's a big deal. So just a couple snapshots to pictures, some eye candy to break up the text. March of 2016, they were installing the tiebacks for the sheet piles. This is a shot from the tower crane looking down. You can see the walls being poured for the aeration basins. And this was taken in January, and a couple of you have been in there to see the inside of it. It's pretty special. It's kind of a proud moment to be walking through there for me. It's kind of bigger than life, really. It's pretty impressive. I just took my parents through there on Saturday to show off. I couldn't help myself. They're in town visiting. So as we move forward into 2018, what kind of things can we expect construction-wise? Well, City Beach, we need to elevate it a couple feet, so there'll be intermittent closures of that while we do that work. Restrooms and the kitchen will be closed that are south of the plant. And they've been on and off closed throughout construction as it is. Access to Windjammer Park will be limited from City Beach Street. And clearly we're going to increase communications with City Council. We heard you loud and clear. Community notifications and updates will continue. We have kind of in the backdrop a newsletter we're working on to mail out to all the residents in Oak Harbor, kind of like we did a while back. And then, as always, we're looking forward to the ribbon cutting ceremony, kind of the finish line, where we hope to have some elected officials at the state and national level. Maybe we can encourage them to come visit a project that they've had some involvement in. So moving on to current project cost estimates, something that I know you're all pretty familiar with at this point. This is just me venting a little bit in this slide, and I'll try to be as gentle as I can. But when we first started this project, our finance software was not set up for project cost tracking. The module was there, but we'd never encountered something of this magnitude before. BARS is the accounting system that we're required to follow. It does not equal project cost tracking. Our budget goes from year to year, and a project like this, as you saw, goes multiple years. So we were immediately met with this challenge of how do we track this thing. The initial project cost tracking actually was performed by KBA. They helped us with that. We tried setting up project cost tracking internally, but it wasn't functioning like we needed it to. So when KBA came on board in 2015, Chris down there, kudos to her. She set up, it took her almost 2 months to set up spreadsheet to just track what we were spending money on. That eventually, with Patricia's help, we got our city's financial system and the accounting system that we were using down at the treatment plant to jive. And it wasn't until, how long ago, 6 months, a year ago, maybe a little bit more, that we actually got them reconciled. And on a regular basis, finance and KBA reconcile their bookkeeping to make sure everybody's on the same page. So as we move into the cost categories, this is I think this might even be the exact same slide I showed in September of 16. We break it out into acquisitions, administration, finance, and then there's professional services during design, and then the professional services during construction would be engineering, it'd be like Corollo engineer providing construction services, or KBA or ERCI that's out there in the field. And then the construction cost itself. So what it doesn't include, you got to be clear about when you're talking about costs, what it does include, but also what it does not include. So the cost of producing the facilities plan and engineering report, it's not included. That's typically not included when you discuss total project costs on normal projects, but it is a cost that we're not tracking in this presentation. The outfall design and construction is not included in this, and these are almost the same slides as in 2016 because I was trying to make sure we stayed apples to apples. So since the outfall was in need of repair and would have needed to be repaired regardless of what happened with the treatment plant, we pulled that as a separate project. Windchamber Park Phase 1 elements funded by the general fund are not included. So this is going to get more and more interesting to track as we move into the Windjammer Park Phase 1, but there's a defined set of items that need to be constructed to serve the treatment plant or because of the impacts of the treatment plant. And then there's the things that are above and beyond to make it nice, really nice. So a couple of definitions and this relates back to some slides you'll see later, but contracted estimated budget, to me that's the same thing as total project cost. And then what we've included in here, what you'll see in the presentation in a moment, are the expenses through January 31st, and that's for all the invoices paid through that time. And then the balance is what we have left, and that's a combination of contracted and estimated. As you'll see, a bulk of the cost is in the construction, and that's that 116 or 117 million is construction costs. Includes the estimated items to complete the construction. And the others break out quite nicely. It's very, it's professional services. It's nice to see it in the pie chart. The real one everyone's eyes drawn to is the 140,725,000. And of course, that's still an estimate until the project is complete, but that's what the estimate is at this time. So how, as I said before, we're 8 months pregnant. Well, how much have we spent? Well, 65%, 90,778,000 has already been, checks have been written on this project. We have a remaining of close to about 50 million to go. This slide here, it kind of breaks it all down. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it because it's a lot of numbers, and I know that I got a lot of other things to talk about. The key thing on this slide was we quite often use what is the percent of construction. When we're on the front end, when we're doing an estimate of what is a reasonable engineering design fee, we quite often take the estimated construction cost and multiply it by a percent, and that's what we use for budgeting typically. That can float, it actually typically floats between 10 and 14%. In this case, it's showing lower, but it's kind of, one of those weird metrics that it also is impacted by the cost of the treatment plant going up. So I think it's what it's really telling me is we're in the right range. So this is everything kind of rolled up and compared to what we showed in September of 2016. And if you go down line by line, you can see administration, that bumped up. We started including in-house services for the project. So my time, Brett's time, there were some other things that got added in there. Finance, we moved some costs around. In finance, and then really the bulk of the difference is in the construction cost. That estimate that's up there was developed in June of 2016 and then used in the presentation in September of 2016. Okay, so why have costs changed? So I'm gonna walk through a little history of the project here, because you can't really compare one cost estimate to another without understanding what's changed from step to step. So the original cost estimate was it was for a 55-acre site, somewhere in that envelope shown in the graphic. That slides from the presentation that we did. We added in the potential of using Carl Friend's property, then opted not to use that. It did not account for specific site conditions because we hadn't picked a specific location yet. So moving forward to 30%, there's a lot of text on here, but those two slides from on the right kind of show, this is when we had some bookends. Corollo's cost estimate was different from Hoffman's, and we were trying to battle with why that was different. But what it really ended up being is instrumentation, electrical instrumentation and controls was originally in the facilities plan estimated at the low end. When we came back at 30%, we estimated at the high end. The site size was reduced. At that point, we knew where it was going to go, and we were trying to compact things as much as we could. That meant deeper excavation. We decided to go with a different solids handling, and that's kind of a conversation on its own, but originally we were going to use lime stabilized sludge, which is lime stabilized cow manure, and truck it to another location and end up over on the other side of the mountains. At the 30% level, we had looked at the thermoflight dryer, and that was a smaller thermal dryer, high temperatures. The more we got to looking at it, well, anyway, this cost estimate included it. I'll talk about the next step in a minute. But that was the reason why we chose to do that. Chose to go from lime stabilized sludge to a dryer is because then we could produce a product that we could use here on the island. We'd remove more liquid from it, and it would be something that is Class A that you could eventually, if things go well, have a market for it. It meant less trips through town with a truck full of sludge. It meant less trucks off the island with trucks full of sludge. And so we thought this was an added value. And at the time that we were looking at this, it was almost a wash in the life cycle cost of going one way or the other. In the 30% design, that now we knew where the site was, and we knew we were going to have to do some work on City Beach Street. We were still talking about Bayshore at the time when that estimate was done, and a 200-seat training facility. Park improvements were not included because that was still just a dream at that point. And Whidbey Island Bank was not, a demo of that building was not included. And at that time, using Hoffman's cost estimate, we were looking at a total project cost of $135 million. All right, let's move on to 60%. This one here was presented in September of 2015. Okay, so now we have a site, and we've done a lot of work on it. We were able to, at that point, reduce the size of the deep X where we had to do the sheet piles and remove soil because we had to refine the design and we were going with a smaller footprint and we were doing everything we could to do that. And part of that was combining two buildings. Originally, the headworks was a separate structure from the membrane building, and we tied those together at that point and helped us minimize the excavation. You know, we're getting to 60%, so there's greater detail on the drawings, which allowed the vendors to give us better, more accurate pricing. We completed site prep A, which was shaving off that first 7 feet that was behind us when we did the groundbreaking. And we'd gone around and been able to confirm more of what was going on with the soils through soil penetration tests. Once again, mitigation was not included, and so impacts of the park were not included. And at this point, we'd selected a different dryer. What we found out is that thermoflight dryer that we thought was so cool, our operators made a few phone calls, and we decided it wasn't the best thing to go with. And it's a good thing we did something different because the company's out of business now, as I understand it. So we changed to a belt dryer, which is a different process. I could go on for a half hour about the whole thing, so I'll stop myself. But long and short of it is it's bigger. We got a great bid from a company out of Germany that's trying to break into the U.S. market. They've been around for a long time, and we've had a few struggles here and there with communication being from Germany and the distance, but parts are showing up, and we've got a building for it. So at that point, Hoffman's estimate, we're looking at $131 million total estimated cost. Total project cost. And once again, I want to highlight that the slides that I've attached in here are ones from presentations that we've done to council in the past. So that answers one of the questions about when have we talked about project costs before. So this was the last time we sat in front of council and talked about project costs. Now things were going pretty good at this time, you know. So we reconfigured a few things. We deleted some stone columns. By moving the odor control outside the yard. This estimate includes some work outside the clean water facility footprint. Park mitigation hadn't been designed yet, but I think we had somewhat of a placeholder for it, not quite enough. And then odor control design wasn't complete at that point, but all we knew is that it was moving outside the yard. And at the time, the market itself was doing quite well. The estimate that we used from Hoffman was from June, that rolled up into the presentation we did in September. And shortly after that is when the market went through the roof down in Seattle. So why have costs changed? So, you know, they changed because we've had different estimates and the project has evolved. It may, you know, the biosolids, clearly the process we were using changed. You know, we need to start, I think there was an idea that where to include the demolition of the Whidbey Island Bank building. Windjammer Phase 1 expanded into a bigger project. GMPs 10, 11, and 12 were competitively bid in the hot market, and I want to highlight that. So the estimate that was presented before to get to this presentation in September, that was based on a cost estimate done by Hoffman in June, based on what they knew and could forecast at the time. If we all had a crystal ball, we might have provided something different, but that's what we had at the time. When the bids came back through, the market was hot, and we saw an increase. And I'll get into that detail in just a minute. And some of that you'll see I have in greater detail the difference of what happened when 10, 11, and 12. But the one that stands out to me is the cost of materials. When you look at metal and fabrication type items, those ones, that market had to have just gone through the roof right when we needed them. So this is a breakdown of those three. So, you know, it says the September 16 estimate really produced in June, but presented to council in September. what was actually awarded, and then the cost difference. So you can see right at 10 million, 10.5 million of the cost difference, and these are hard bids. This doesn't include any of the overhead associated with Hoffman. This is just the bids we received from subcontractors on these packages. So if you roll that up at the top, and now you add in, okay, Windjammer Park, we estimated roughly 3 million, and with expanding around and increasing the size of phase one, our placeholder right now is 5.3 million. Keep in mind that is just the treatment plant's responsibility. So if you add on top of that, it kind of compounds, because on top of that you have risk contingency at 3.5%, owner contingency, and tax. So right there you're at 14.6 million in difference, and we were looking at about $18 million in difference between September of 16 and now. So we're really close to bridging the gap. I didn't go any further into the weeds than this. This seemed like it pretty easily explains a huge portion of what happened between September of 16 and now. So when has information been presented about cost increases? Well, every one of those presentations that I referred to earlier as part of that, but they've also been reflected in every GMP contract component and consultant amendment that's presented to council, and they're rolled up at the tail end of each one of those that's been presented. We could have done a better job, of showing the total project cost overall, but we did show what the cost was for those individual contracts. And if you remember, some of those packets were like 600 pages because we included all the previous contracts amendments associated with them. And clearly, we get it. We're going to communicate probably more than you care for, but we're going to over-communicate from here on forward. So how are project costs managed? How do we keep, I think it was phrased, how do we rein in the project costs? Well, we're already doing it, and I hate to say it, but that we are. We're working really hard to do that. Every GMP is either competitively bid, or if it is negotiated work, like the concrete work and the framing, it's validated. We don't just say, hey, Hoffman, here's a check. No, not even. We sit down and we have very, sometimes heated conversations about how this is going to play out. And we've been really fortunate that Hoffman's been so willing to let us banter with them about it, and it's worked out really well in the long run. So just these are some examples that I've already covered on some of the items we've negotiated with Hoffman. One that hasn't come up before is negotiated support services. Those are the things like crane rental and survey. Early procurement we talked about. Concrete work we talked about. Some work related to archaeology. And that's a real interesting one to bring up, because if you remember when we were going into this project, I mentioned it before, we were at the tail end of a lawsuit about archaeology on Pioneer Way. We were just working on a 42-inch outfall where we found archaeology, and we had a lot of eyes on us as far as cultural resources go. And what we negotiated was different paces of excavation for the deep excavation. So we were able to say, well, if you're going really, if there's nothing in the way and you just have a monitor standing there watching, that's one price. If you come across something that's going to slow you down but doesn't require you to stop, here's another price. If we tell you to go home and come back another day or just sit here and wait, that was another cost. And we had ways of measuring that, ways of communicating that with the contractor and subs, so that everybody understood what that meant ahead of time. So this is an example of one invoice from Hoffman for, I think it's for December, in any case. That's one, double-sided. And it's checked by KBA in excruciating detail. Dan Williams does a great job of looking through it, and then Chris Bailey with her fine-tooth comb goes through it again. And I tell you what, you don't want to be a penny off with her. She's got it down. Then it goes to Brett, and then myself, and then finance even audits them to make sure that everything needs to be there. And eventually, eventually all these were, our goal is to submit these to Department of Ecology for reimbursement on those loans that we've acquired. And they don't take it lightly either. They go through and make sure, oh, is this related to constructing the treatment plant, or is this something that you're just wanting to do? And because their job is to pay for clean water, or to reimburse us for that loan for clean water. And a byproduct of working with ecology is that we have to do single audit, which is where you get the federal and state audit. They work together and you get them both done at the same time. We've been working on this project long enough. We've had 2 of them, no findings. Spend a lot of time explaining that a change order is not a GMP, but we had no findings on those 2 audits. And at the tail end of the project, because it's a GCCM job, we have to do an audit at the end. And what that does is it validates that what we paid Hoffman was actually paid to their contractors, and goes through their books that way. So all that, that's how they're managed, tracked, and that we make sure that we're not double paying for porta pot or whatever it might be. It's gone through in detail. And I want you to have confidence that we are going through it in that kind of a detail, and that we aren't overspending or doing anything inappropriate, because we have so many sets of eyes on what's going on. It's just, I don't see that anything awry could happen. So the next one is to talk about contingencies, because that question came up. We've talked about it. There's this number floating around about what is that and how do we use it? Well, there's 2 types that are in the GMP contracts with Hoffman. One is risk contingency, and that is for scope gap, and I might. We talked about this earlier. I'll see if I can explain it visually. You have one contract with a subcontractor that goes to here, and you have another contractor their work stops here. And it might be that there's a meter in there, or it's work that we know needs to be done. It just so happened that this guy thought, his responsibility stopped here. This guy's responsibility stopped here. Well, the risk contingency is to cover the cost of putting the piece in the middle. And it comes up from time to time. They can be fairly simple or fairly substantial, and I got a couple examples in a minute. Owner contingency are for things that the owner is responsible for. Sometimes it's something as simple as we want to have key code locks. Sometimes it's because there's a site condition that's changed that we need to compensate the contractor for. We track all these through what we call cost change memorandums. Is that a sample of? So we're up to about 700 in some of the cost change memorandums. This is 1 month's worth. We go through, each one has a cover on it that indicates what it's for. And then you'll see as you flip through it, it has all the supporting documentation. Each one of these is a conversation. Each one of these is working with our contractor to make sure it's the right thing to do, that it's right for this. And it could be something that actually returns money to the city, or it could be something that pulls from one of those contingencies, or it could be moving something from one GMP to another. So we track all of that using this methodology, and we have a spreadsheet that kind of tracks what each one was for, so we can kind of find them if we need to later. And there is quite often dollar amounts associated with these. Sometimes there's not. It's just capturing something. And the hard part is you can't just add them all up and say it's this much more, this much less, because it involves so many different moving parts. But the point being is, if you want to come down and see these, you're welcome to come down and take a look and thumb through them. There's quite a lot of detail on each one. So any cost savings that we see if we don't use the contingencies that we have, they get returned. That dollar amount is contractually returned to the city, and that includes the negotiated support services. So if we don't have the crane for as long, or the sandy huts for as long, that comes back to the city as well through the contract. So a couple examples. One of them early on was we reduced the under drain for deep foundation. It lowered the cost by $175,000 by shrinking that, and that was early on. That was when we still had rock in the bottom of the hole down there. Another one was we modified the micropiles for differing site conditions. We found that the glacial till, if you went too far into it, you got an artesian well. So we had to change our thought process and design on that. It ended up actually costing us money, $75,000, but in the long run, the estimate that we got to continue down the path we were going, it would have increased the project cost by $650,000. So sometimes they're kind of weird that you have to pay more, but ultimately it's to save money later. Looks like I copied a slide there. All right. So what is the balance of contingencies? As of January 15th, you'll see here that the total remaining is $2,400,000 of $4.7 million that we have contracted. Just a side note, we're working on some credits back to the owner contingency of about $550,000. At the moment, it takes some time to process these, and we just happened to take a snapshot at a time where it looked like the city had used a lot of its contingencies, when in fact we're working on some corrections there. So moving on to funding. Are you happy to let me keep talking?
Keep going.
All right.
Good.
Can you believe I've been talking for this long? It's already been almost 50 minutes. I'm trying. See, the effective interest rate has decreased on this project. And the reason why I say that is we started out, the estimate back in 2010 was 20 years bonds at 6%. And then as the project progressed, we looked, oh, well, wait a minute, we can do 30-year bonds. But that was also at 6%. Because we completed the facilities plan, although we were required to complete the facilities plan to be permit compliant, it was the tool that we used to get SRF loans through ecology. If we didn't have that facilities plan, we wouldn't have been able to get the loans. And I can't express to you the amount of effort that went into obtaining the funding package that we have. Every one of the line items on this page was effort put forward by staff and consultants to apply competitively for these items. Every one of them, well, except for maybe the last one, but all the rest of them required an amount of effort. And it's something to be said. I mean, look at the interest rates over to the side. The ones that don't have anything next to them that was a forgivable. They're either a grant or forgivable. There was forgivable principal, so those are all grants.
463 is where we go.
Which one?
The 463, 154.
Yeah, that's
Oh.
a favorable principle.
Yeah, forgivable principal on the 2016. So it's just forgivable principal, but you still need to pay it back. All in all, what a difference. I mean, if you think about, I tried to figure out a graphic to show this because it just doesn't, on one slide like this, it really doesn't demonstrate what this means. I mean, because we were going from think about it, 6% interest on your car compared to low, 1.2% when you go down to the store and buy your car, a car. I mean, it makes a huge difference, and it's really been the saving grace on the project, to be honest. So, how will the proposed funding impact the city? So there were some questions presented by council that refer to this. By obtaining the SRF loans, it's reduced the need to obtain additional revenue bonds. Low interest loans at 20 years will clearly result in a lower lifetime cost than if we issued bonds. I could go into detail on that one for a minute, but it's really made a huge impact for us. The grant funding of $8.5 million requires no repayment. I mean, think about that. That's pretty impressive. It's not easy to get a grant of that magnitude. And then revenue bonds, there was concern about because we're issuing the bonds, how's that going to impact the city's ability in bond rating for things later? Well, revenue bonds don't really impact our ability to obtain general obligation bonds in the future. So if there's some need for that in the future, it's not going to impact that ability. Hey, I know somebody in that picture. So moving on to rates.
That was a fine day. I was clearly dressed up for the
Oh, it's all great. So rates is broken off in a separate bucket or area because it's really more than just a clean water facility. Even though it's the elephant in the room, it also includes the RBC plant, which is going away, the lagoons, citywide collection system, and capital projects that we have queued up, other than the clean water facility, and citywide operations and maintenance of not only the treatment plant but the collection system and everything else. So it's really this rates are really a mix of your funding, your capital projects, and your O&M costs. You throw all those into a blender, into a model, and they spit out what your rate structure should be to keep you ahead of the game. This is what we started out with back in 2010. This is before we even started the facilities plan. We knew that this was coming along. We had we just pulled a number. Okay, we were looking at a plant in the lagoons. We were going to take over the fourth cell. It was going to supplement the existing treatment capacity we had. And 70 million, okay? And then let's say we're going to pay 15 million out of that from reserves or cash from the city. And then the rest of it we're going to finance at 20 years, for 20 years at 6%. And when you plug that into the blender model, the rate structure that you see there is what came out of it. Just steadily increasing. So we didn't adopt all of it at the same time. We only adopted the first several years of it, first 6 years. So, and that was done through Ordinance 1587. And that was all done before we even got started. Well, let's jump forward in time. So now now we're meaning business. We're getting started on the project. It's March of 2016, and we're getting ready to issue bonds, chase down bonds. And so we evaluated our rates again. And so in March, it looked like the rates were going to go up a couple bucks, maybe as much as $10 in 2019, and to as much as 135 in 2021, based on the funding and the treatment plant cost estimate at that time. But once again, the model went out further, but we adopted just the next 3 years. So through 2019, we know what our rate structure is, and that's what's currently active at this point. So we were all paying $89.36 a month for residential sewer. So we checked in again in September with updated construction cost estimate and funding that had come in, and it dropped a little bit. Then if you look out at 2021, it's dropped down to 119 and 86 cents. So it's still a lot, but getting better. we didn't change the rates at this point. We didn't see a need to. We had some time on the existing rate structure before we needed to do that. This was intended as a check-in point. Well, we've done another check-in point, and this, we just got the results back end of January. And once again, we haven't changed anything that was set in Ordinance 1760. So there was no need to change those. And now looking out further, it's gone from 119 down to 110 in the year 2021. And that's all a combination, and that's with the $140 million total project costs. That's with current numbers, current funding. This is a snapshot for today of what the rates might be. Now, our intent is, and I think I have a slide on this, but I'll talk while I got this up. The intent is not to change the rates until after we've completed the treatment plant and until we have a solid understanding of what that final project cost is. And we'll probably only do just for 3 more years based on what we know at that time, because as we operate the plant for a couple of years, we'll get a better understanding. First 3 years are kind of a little bit kind of getting things rolling. And then once we have a consistent cost on chemicals and other things and labor, we'll update it again. And I have this down at the bottom. We still have been in discussions with the Navy. I don't know where it's going to go. We've been having some very nice conversations, though, about their potential participation and connection to the treatment plant. I don't expect that to happen in the next 3 years. I hope that it does, but I think it's going to take a bit more time than that to get things negotiated, and presuming it does come to fruition, some time to actually do the improvements. So this is just a feel-good summary slide. You know, even though the project cost has increased, our active pursuit of additional low-cost funding has maintained a rate consistent with past projections and allowed the city to construct a project that will serve the city for the next 40 to 50 years. We're not looking to tomorrow, we're looking for the long run. So Windjammer Park Phase 1, I'm gonna try, I know that we're running, actually we're getting pretty close, right on about an hour. I'm gonna buzz through these slides because really Windjammer Park Phase 1 is gonna be a topic really for another meeting. We need to get into that with some more detail. But I wanted to tell you where things were and give you a little snapshot of what's going on, because it does relate to the clean water facility. So these are I intend to go through, you know, how did we get to the Windjammer Park Phase 1, kind of what's the schedule looking at, current design and construction status, just a touch on anticipated cost, because there's a lot of things going on right there at the moment, and talk to you about how we might fund it. So this dates back a little while, but we had the Windjammer Park integration plan. So that's different from Windjammer Park Phase 1. The integration plan was, hey, let's look at the 10,000 foot level for the whole park. We had a lot of wonderful community feedback. We had a citizen advisory group. We met 5 times, had 2 open meetings with public, and ultimately they endorsed the plan that was the plan was adopted by council in middle of 2016. But you can see all the touch points we had to develop this plan. It was we didn't do it in isolation. It's a public project. I really feel like we captured what they were looking for. The proposed phase 1 was actually just this area here, which was what was necessary to clean up after the treatment plant project. Seemed like an awkward place to stop when you got to looking at it. So we decided, hey, let's look at expanding it down to here and include part of phase 2 and 3. Then you have that whole crescent parking area. You have the other kitchen. It made sense to us to chase a lofty dream. Let's go for it. So in November of 2016, we authorized Carollo and their team of consultants, which you've met, Gil from Greenworks and MWA was involved, to design phase 1. Well, we dug into the weeds some more. So phase 1 didn't happen in a vacuum either. We were started out at 10,000 foot with integration plan. Let's get down. Okay, you said you wanted a swing set. What kind of swing set? You want a play area. What kind of play area? You want a splash park. Well, what theme do you want it to be? So we needed to, and Gil was very, I think our design team was very good at communicating and taking that feedback and incorporating it into the design. So what does it include? Phase 1 includes everything outside the walls of the clean water facility that's within that blue envelope I showed you before. So demolition of the Whidbey Island Bank building, the improvements to City Beach Street, new kitchens, restroom pathways, landscaping, splash park, it's all in there. That's phase 1. Now keep in mind when I'm saying this, roughly half of it is the treatment plant's responsibility, and roughly half of it is going to be some other source of funding. So a couple things have changed, and I thought it was important to bring back to you. So now that we've gotten to final design, what's changed since the last time we talked to you? Well, we added a maintenance building. We heard from our parks department, gee, we don't want to keep driving the trailer with the mowers on it down there, so we added a maintenance building. The sports courts. What was one of the interesting things that came out for me was the amazing interest in pickleball. So we included pickleball courts built in with the design for the basketball courts, so it could accommodate both. We eliminated the north. There were 2 pathways that paralleled each other. We eliminated one of those, so you won't see that moving forward. And we increased the number of Gary oak trees. We heard back from the community that they'd like to see. Actually, they would like to see a lot more Gary oaks than what we're showing, but this, I think, is a good accommodation for this phase of the project. And we did increase the number of them based on that feedback we received. Another kind of interesting change that's happened, if you remember some of the renderings of the picnic shelters, they had this fireplace that faced outward. Based on feedback we got, fireplace is gone. It's just gone. And but what we did do is we maximized the interior space of the kitchen. So it's to the 500 square feet. It's the maximum you can go without going into a different building code. So they're going to be a touch different, but all in all, I think it's going to function better for our maintenance crews and for the city. So as we move forward, what are things at? Well, the design's complete. As I mentioned earlier, it was completed in right before Christmas. We've split it into 7 bid packages. We opened 5 of those bid packages on the 1st of March, so just last Thursday. We're still digesting the results of those. The water play area, which Splash Park, that bid opening is on March 15th, so just around the corner. And then there's a couple interesting gates that go along with the treatment plant that are specialty items the bids are coming back on the 22nd for those. And construction is expected to start as soon as we're able to award bids, and we'll continue through. The goal is if everything goes well, to get it all done by the end of the year. But there's likely to be things that we need to finish up when it dries up in 2019. So the anticipated costs. So this is always the fun part of the conversation. But when we looked at this initially, and we were looking at the Windjammer Park integration plan cost estimate, and then later on we did another swipe at the cost estimate at 60% for Windjammer Park. We're hovering around the $10 million total for that phase 1 cost. And what we're hearing back from Hoffman, although it was nothing formal, is that they had this feel that it was going to be closer to the 15 million range. So we saw this come in and we said, well, how do we manage this? Well, we break it up. We had the 7 bid packages for starters, so we broke them out by discipline. And we further broke each one of those bid packages into separate schedules so that we could, when it gets time to pick and choose what we are capable of funding and not capable of funding, we have flexibility in the bid packages to accommodate that. Let's see. We've tried to split it up and find breakpoints in the design where, if we find that for whatever reason we can't fund the entire thing, we can still have a whole project, and we still have a plan for elements that we can do as phase 2. Right? I mean, this is not a single phase project, so if we're not able to do it all as part of phase 1, so be it. Let's start planning for phase 2. Now these slides are intended to show, it's really hard to describe because it's like this layer cake. So what you're looking at now is what is required, the area of the park that will need to be disturbed just to pick up after ourselves. So we have 40,000 plus yards of material that needs to be spread around. That's the grassy looking area on the image above. All the work immediately surrounding the treatment plant, I mean, we've got to be able to drive trucks in and out. That's part of the deal. And then we're tearing down the Woodby Island Bank building, so we've got to replace that with parking that we've removed from south of the old treatment plant. And we also have some obligations for parking associated with that. So these are items that are also sewer fund items, but they're for impacts to the park or things that we've damaged or removed through the process. So you can see we have, I got the pointer here. We got the kitchen, so we have the kitchen here. We're going to move it over here. There's the restroom. We're going to put in some Portland loos. There was a basketball court right here, still is. It's going to get bumped over to here. This parking is to supplement what's been removed. Over here there were 90-some spots, so we're placing a number of those there. Because we're working adjacent to wetlands, we've got some improvements that we need to do there as well. And then, of course, we've got to reconnect the waterfront trail. So these are the items that would be come out of some other funding, general fund, and this was we've got the splash park mixed in there, and another kitchen on the west side of the park. The maintenance building is one of those. It's extending the parking area, that crescent parking area, and any one of those, I think you could probably piecemeal this if you had to, and or hold off on certain things if we were seeking other funding. So what's in the budget, or what we've shown in the numbers for the clean water facility, that 140 million includes a placeholder for 5.3 million for park improvements. Now, when we get done running the numbers through, that could go up or down, I'm not sure, but that's the placeholder that we have for it, and I think it's a substantial placeholder. But I know there's this desire to say if it's 14.7, it's going to be 14.7. This is one of those areas that, and it's really the only area left that we have that could flux that a little bit. As I stated before, it's basically picking up after ourselves and permit requirements going through the SEPA process. So available general funds for the other items. This is why we need to have another workshop. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it now, but we clearly at this point don't have enough general funds to cover the fun stuff that we want to do. And unfortunately, the grant cycles didn't line up with our project. So RCO and the other grants are typically like every other year. We didn't have enough information to apply for it when the grant opening was there. And if we were to go for this opening, we wouldn't receive the funds till 2019. So we're kind of in one of those rock and a hard place with the grant funding for park improvements. So we really have to rely on general fund for that. And next presentation, we'll talk about how we go about doing that. And I'd like to think of it as exciting because it's also looking to the future, because even though we may or may not be able to construct everything, we've got a great plan moving forward to do it. So I want to make sure we keep the positive momentum going, because it can be and will be amazing. And I've already covered these. So what to expect park related. Oh, not quite yet. What to expect in 2018. Events may need to be held. I'm saying that with a very soft may. They're likely to be held someplace else if everything goes as planned. Even if all we do is just restore, pick up after the treatment plant, we've got to spread that material around. We're going to continue. We know there's an interest in the RV dump station. We're going to continue working on a new location for that. We have some ideas already. just takes some effort to make it happen. What are we going to do with the windmill? That's something we need to talk about as well. During construction, the waterfront trail will remain open. We've made a special point to make sure that people that frequent that trail will be able to continue using it. It may meander around from place to place as we need to do things, but it's going to remain open. And we're going to continue with conversations with the community about construction phasing. So, we know this has an impact on Little League and events in the park, and we're going to continue those communications with those different groups. And not only with just those different groups, but we need to make sure we continue communicating with the public in general. Just as we need to improve communications with City Council, we also need to continue that same level of communication with the public at large, and that's going to mean mailers and website updates and everything. I threw this slide in here because I've had a lot of requests. Why can't you just let us use the park? I sure wish there was a way to do it different. The most efficient way to do it is to just pull the Band-Aid off, put a fence up, let the contractor do what they got to do, get the grass planted, concrete in, pull the fencing. Get in there, get out of there, be done with it. If we try to break this thing into pieces, it's going to lengthen it and make it more expensive, and we're already having trouble figuring that part out. So this is what was included in the bid package for the 5 bids that were put out. This is the space that was demonstrated to them is available for them to use to do the work they need to do. So while I'd like to say we can, what I want to do is I want to say that there's other city facilities that are available. There's Fort Nugent Park. There's the marina, has Catalina Park right there. We've done a number of things on Bayshore and on Pioneer Way. There's a lot of other opportunities to have these events just a little bit different. And hopefully at the next year when they come back, they'll say, oh my God, this park is beautiful. And then we'll get into phase 2 and phase 3 and have something pretty amazing down there. Am I sounding too Pollyanna about this, or is this...
The one place that we don't have extra space for is those 3 ball fields. So I just want to make sure, because that's going to cover like a season and a half of Little League ball. The fields will still be accessible for the kids to get on and play on,
Absolutely.
right? Okay, thank you.
Oh, we didn't... Yeah, that was
Okay.
right on top of the list.
It just gets really close there. I just wanted to make sure.
So next steps and questions. So next step, let's go ahead and hand that around. While that's going around, I can talk. So, okay, well, we have an idea of how we can communicate better with council, and this is one of them. Excuse me, Tim. So our intent is to include this on a monthly basis, the second meeting of the month. This is something that KBA produces for us. It captures what's going on with construction in some detail. It has some photographs in the back of what's happened that month. And then if you flip all the way to the back, we're going to slide in a printout that Patricia provides that'll have a summary of the total project costs. And that'll be provided at the second meeting of each month. And we also have the most recent pay request for construction in there as well. And if you see something in there that you don't like, or you want it phrased, captured differently, or if we missed something, by all means, let us know. We want to make sure we're getting you the information you want and need. And I think this does it, and then some. And it has a nice little summary. I think we might want to add a little more of a summary, executive summary to the beginning of it, so that you don't have to thumb through the whole thing if you don't want to. But this is the direction that we'd like to head, to give you that detailed information on a monthly basis. So, like I said, the second meeting of the month, so that gives us time to process everything that's come in from the month before we send it out to council. And then when Brett does his presentation, he'll include a table in there that's pulled straight out of the financials you'll see in the back of the packet. And it'll be, a roll-up summary of the project costs. It'll be new at the second meeting because it'll coincide directly with this report. We'll repeat that again at the first meeting of the month, but it'll be very much the same as the one you saw the meeting before. So I hope I explained that well enough. So moving forward, you know, we haven't given up on trying to find ways to keep project costs down, even though we're 7, 8 months, 11 months pregnant, whatever it feels like at this point. We're going to continue working towards that and continue communicating with the public. We have we always talk about our website. There's a nice library on there if you want information. I, quite frankly, was using that library myself, developing this presentation. It has anything and everything related to this project since the beginning of it is in there. Agenda bills, videos, presentations, the whole gambit is all there. It's a lot of information, and maybe that's something we can work on, is trying to figure out a better way to organize it, but it's all there. And then we'd like to come back in March. We need to come back in March to talk about what we're going to do with the park improvements, because that has to start rolling, because we need some of that has to happen in order to gain access to the treatment plant. So an hour and 15 minutes, 80 slides.
Thank you, Joe. I would like to, before we turn it to the council for questions, I would like to ask a couple of things. You mentioned come back in March for the Windjammer. Is that planned at a workshop, another workshop this month, or is that planned at a regular council meeting?
Our intent is to have it at a workshop setting like this, where we can discuss what it is that we'd like to do, and then ultimately come back in April to a council meeting for approval of whatever we decide to do. I don't have the date set. We're still kind of combing through the bids that we have, and we still have some yet to come in.
So your plan is to have those bids sorted through and a recommendation of some sort?
Yeah, well, it's options.
Okay.
'Cause, you know, I think as staff, we need to go through and scrub the bids and see what we got and come to you with some thought-out options. If anybody'd like to be part of that conversation, they're welcome to, but it's gonna take a little bit of effort to get through it. Not a lot, but enough that I don't want to drag everybody else down with it.
One other thing, in my notes, you mentioned that council, now I'm going back to the total project costs
Okay.
with this question. You mentioned that council had some sort of information in 2015. Can you tell me what meeting that was that showed $138 million?
That would have been the 30% cost estimate.
So
If I remember right.
it's one of the regular council meetings in
It would have been a workshop setting.
you know which month?
I think I had the date on there. What slide is it?
It was 135 million at the 30% design on 4/7/15.
So that's a council workshop.
Yes,
Okay.
it's on slide 32.
Okay. So with that, I'm going to turn to council right now and ask if you've got questions about the presentation, any of the numbers. Councilor Heisen?
Couple of questions on page 14, I'm sorry, I don't know what, slide 40? You said, quote, "We have to do an audit." At the end of who actually performs those audits? I'm sorry if you said.
We hire somebody to perform an independent audit of the project.
Okay. Okay, thank you. And then on slide 44, you mentioned an owner contingency. Can you define owner contingency? Who's the owner?
Yeah, that's owner contingency. It's the items that the city's responsible for that weren't necessarily captured in the GMP amendment. So it's something that either this has come up during the project that needs to be done, that the city's responsible for paying for, or it's something that the city has directly asked for.
Thank you. And this might be a Patricia question. Slide 47, project funding, when you've got the list of either forgivable and or low interest, do you have I mean, I understand that all of these were estimated, but is there a total cost savings number based on what we had estimated?
I don't have a total cost savings. It is an average interest rate when you calculate all of the items of 3.25%. But between that and a 6% loan, no, I haven't identified that.
Okay.
And I really do appreciate everybody's patience and taking notes. That was a lot to get through.
That's great. It would have taken a lot longer if we kept talking. Slide 61 and 62, you talk about the CAG process. And now I know there were two different incarnations of the citizen advisory or community advisory group. Does the 5 meetings and the 17 members include both of those groups?
Well, the first effort for the integration plan included the more focused group, the 17 that represented different aspects of the community.
Right.
When we moved on to Windjammer Park Phase 1, we had an open house at Skagit Community College over
Right.
there, and then we had an online open house where we had 160 some odd comments come back.
Yeah, I recall that there was a group that was put together, and it was way before 2016. Was that part of the group that worked on the actual selection of the site? Am I confused? Were those two separate? I'm getting
I don't remember
nods.
that one.
They were two separate. There was, I think they even had some design charrette.
Yes.
Yeah, so that was just for selection of the treatment plant
Okay.
location.
Okay, and then the Windjammer was too. So okay, thank you. That is all I have. Thank you.
Councilor Wiesner.
First off, Joe, I gotta commend you. I mean, great presentation. I understand you're sitting in a pretty warm seat over there, and hopefully you won't take any of my comments wrong. I see the passion you put into this project. I met with you down there. I realize this has been your baby, and I know that you're a proud papa. So, okay. I have a couple of questions first about the questions that we answered or asked and that you feel you've answered, and I've got a couple that I don't know that we quite answered. One is, there was a question from the council, and I'm not sure what it was referencing about the $2 million over budget on GMP in the GMP 11 presentation. You know, we're $6 million over budget on GMP 11 alone. Just that one GMP, so I'm kind of curious. I don't know if that question really got answered.
No, it didn't actually, and I'm glad you brought it up. I meant to mention it on one of the slides and forgot to. So thank you for bringing it up. My understanding is it was intended to reference a smaller portion of the bid packages that we got back, and that on those that we got, it was 2 million over. I think it could have been explained a little bit better, but as you say, the real reality of it was it was 6 million at that point.
Just that one GMP.
On just that one GMP.
And I do appreciate the fact that you get, I guess, the basis of at least some of my concerns here is the fact that the communication of this. I mean, to an effect, certainly we like to feel as though we have control over what's going on around us, but we always don't. You know, and in this case, some of the environmental and other things, you know, affected this project, and we didn't have control, but having the knowledge is almost as important as having the control or you know, somewhat thereof. And so just a comment I want to make on question number 9, where when it has information presented about the cost increases, and my take on that is I think that what you had basically stated was the costs were given to council, through each of these deals, but I guess my comment back, but the cost increases weren't. The council was presented the cost, they were presented the cost for a GMP, but I don't know that it was presented relative to what the bid package was. So I don't know that necessarily the cost increases were presented. And I think that was, I think you guys get that. Okay. I do have a question about the $2.3 million in additional work to Windjammer Park that's included in the project. You originally had $5 million budgeted, and I know that we're doing some additional work, but it sounds like a lot of that additional work that's being done is not related necessarily to the sewage treatment plant's portion of Windjammer Park. So I'm a little unclear about what portion of the sewage treatment plant obligation caused the increase of 2.3 million.
In short, expansion of the footprint of phase one would be the greatest one. I don't know that in the first iteration we had the splash park either.
Well, I don't think that's the question though, Joey. What he's
Okay.
asking is, in September of 2016, that estimate was $3 million for the landscaping. And then now it's estimated at 5.3, if that's right. So that increase, back in September of 2016 or June of 2016, when the estimate was created, we didn't have, what percent design were we on the park?
We hadn't started designing the park, so we were carrying an allowance or a budget for it. It was based on the information. We just finished the integration plan about 2 months before, so we were actually doing this budgeting before we actually completed the integration plan. So we were carrying a budget for it, but we didn't have a definition of budget at that point. So it was a placeholder at that point, not
So
based on any factual information.
It was more of a conceptual plan that we were estimating from rather than the actual design.
And at what point did we actually turn that into some sort of a formulated bid?
It would have happened in November of 16 when we authorized Corollo to move forward with the design of phase one.
But that was just the design. We just completed the design at the end of
Right.
2017. And that's what we're getting bids on right now.
Okay, thank you. And I think I got one more here. Involving the Windjammer Park Phase 1, it sounds to me like we may be going into this project unfunded, yet we're pretty sure that we're going to need the park shut down, even if we're not quite sure that we know what exactly we're going to proceed with, because we don't know if we're funded.
So there's that is a kind of a bear of a one to explain, and I don't know why my slides aren't moving. There we go. So it took me a while to try and figure out how to explain this, because it's really a layer cake. So you have you have that big pile of dirt out there you got to get rid of, and we've had the yard set up in that area, right? The construction yard, and we have to have access to the plant for operations. So that's what this slide's intended to show, is how do we clean up after ourselves, and that's treatment plant related. If we hadn't been down, and whether we spread the material in the park or put it in a truck and truck it off to dispose of it someplace else, it's got to be taken care of. Of course, we've chosen this one because it benefits not only the future park improvements, but it's cheaper than moving it off-site. The next one is, these are also responsibility of the sewer fund, but for impacts to the park. So we're demolishing a restroom and a kitchen next to the basketball court down there. Basketball court's going too. All that's getting improved between the new clean water facility and the waterfront. So they have to go someplace else. We've eliminated that parking that's south of the old RBC plant. That's going to go away as well. So that's why we want to do a part of the Crescent parking on the west side of the park. We're encroaching on some wetlands. So that's why we have the wetland improvements. Plus we have because the clean water facility is built up in a floodplain area, we need to find a place. We've displaced water if there's ever a flooding condition. So we needed to create a place to store it. And that's what some of that work is as well. So all that ties together with impacts caused by the treatment plant itself. Now this one is where we start moving into some other funds, general fund. We can do these or not do these. I'd like to do them. I'd like to find ways to do all of them. But that's not sewer fund's responsibility.
But I think the biggest impact to the park and the use of the overall park is spreading that dirt, that big pile of dirt, and that has to happen during dry weather, because we can't just push around mud. It's got to happen during the summer months.
And so we're real confident that's going to start in May.
I'm as confident as you are, because it has to come to you for approval.
Well, you know, because I mean, obviously, my concern is the busy summer tourist season, and I realize the park isn't much to look at right now to begin with. But I would hate to see us tell everybody it's going to be shut down, and you know, then have it sit there idle, being unused. Everybody having changed their plans, and then us be doing nothing. So. I know we'll have a more discussion at a workshop, but that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Joe, my favorite question is why? Always why? And we go back to slide number 3, page 1 on this handout. You covered the why partly, and part of that why is because of the NPDES permit that we have to have. Also part of that why, and you can confirm this, if I take you back between 2008 and 2015, is the Navy, the tribes, and the state flooded the freshwater lagoons, and that jeopardized the potential risk of that plant. Isn't that correct? That's part of the history of this thing. So that really caused us to move along with doing something about it in addition to our permit. And I also remember having explained to me at the time, and it was actually explained to me by Paul Schmidt, who was the former city administrator at the time. He said, why do we need to do that? What is the state going to do? He said, well, the consequences for not having compliance with that is they will not let you have any sewer hookups, so you stop construction in your area, and you could be fined. And the city of Mukilteo went through that whole process a few years ago. That's one of the things that influenced me in the decision that we made on this. In addition to that, we really worked really hard in July of 2015 with the Navy back in the Pentagon to try to get the Navy to come on board. They were not willing to come on board at the time. It was explained to me, and not necessarily by any one person, but by Navy personnel. We're in the business of flying airplanes and fighting wars and not running sewer plants, and it apparently wasn't a high priority. If you have a failure out there, the Navy, the State Department, or the Defense Department can take care of that. But that was one of the reasons for going that way. The next big decision that we made, at least for me, was this issue about GCCM on slide number 12. The GCCM, for me, was very important on this project for the number one reason of timing. Timing is everything. This is an investment in this community. Timing is very important in any investment, and this allowed us to multitask in our planning, our design, our public input on this thing, our value engineering, our preliminary estimates, it's our moving targets, our finance, going after finance, construction, and it allows us also an early start on this thing. And if you look at your schedule that you put up there, which is consistent with what we have been tracking all these 2 years, had we stopped, or let's say we stopped and took another look at this and decided to go someplace else with this plant, or if we would have gone with design, bid, build, It would have taken us 2 years to recover to that point to get to where we are right now. You just verified that out here today. And then it would take another 2 years to get to the construction point to where we are right now. And when you take the time value of money and what's happening to interest rates and the cost increase in construction cost, we would be pushed out potentially 4 years into this thing. We would have a whole different scenario for the cost, the rates for our sewer treatment plant. I'm still convinced that this is the best method to go for this type of a project. The communication, as you summarize this thing at the end, communication is a huge deal. That's one of the things that I think that we really fell down on. And for me individually, not asking the right questions, why, at the right time, I made that mistake. And I'll be accountable for that. Nevertheless, it made no difference in the total cost of where we are today. Had we asked that question even 6 months ago, there isn't anything, even a year ago, there isn't anything I can possibly think of in the process that we could have changed either in design, or I wouldn't want to change the funding because we got about the best rates that you can possibly get, would not have made any difference. But at least it would have been a lot better for the public and for us to actually have a current idea of what that cost is. And I appreciate you going with the monthly report like you have coming out here. The other thing, you know, in that gap where we got the big jump, in that November 2015, September 16 to August 2017, Carollo is also still continuing to design. There was $1 million increase in just Carollo's work. Even though you don't add sales tax to Carollo, the engineering stuff, it's still one of those things that it's still not clear to me today that that was actually included in the total cost when we were talking about 135 million, 134 million. You can comment on that if you care to, because you focus mostly on construction in these summaries in
SCADA or the park.
37, in slide 37. Moving along faster here. On the sewer rates, we're going through the rates. This is something that really I think needs to be emphasized, where we have a moving target where you're going through design, you're going through construction, you're also going through rate analysis. And so they're really moving targets. We had a lot of these discussions in our Thursday morning meetings. It's a challenge, and we can do it, but it's also going to have these flexible numbers that are going to change as we're moving through the process. Now, we can't guarantee that they're going down, but they are trending downward, and I'm really anxious to see what the end of the product's going to cost. But we started out with a napkin estimate. That's what we call in the industry. We have to start someplace. This is approximately where we can start. We didn't know the type of system. We didn't have the location. We didn't even have the funding in here. And as a matter of fact, on the funding, I just wanted to bring that up. And I think you may have a copy of this, but there was a lot of pressure that was put on our former city administrator, Larry Court, and Doug Merriman, when he was the finance director, and not by this mayor, but to go, and you had it on your slide, go out for bonds at 6%. Had we done that at that time, the difference in the cost, the lifetime cost of that funding between going at 6% on bonds versus going what we went through with our SRF funding and the grants is $126,100,000. That's another sewer plant. That's the difference. Our staff made some really good decisions on this thing too. The communication, we blew it. But so many steps in this project for a very, very complicated project. You've all done a pretty darn good job. And as we move through this thing, I'm looking forward to seeing that park come together. We'll be watching really closely too. That's all I have. Thank you, Mayor.
Joe, the first thing I want to say is the right amount. You had 80 slides, you had a time limit. You really went into the projected versus the actual costs, where we've seen some increases where things fell out of line. I have a pretty good idea now why a lot of those different things happen. You answered a lot of the questions that we had when we came together. I appreciate you not going into the weeds that I know you could have gone into a few times, because this could have been a much longer presentation. And that's why I say just the right amount, because you answered a lot of the questions that we had. I like this report. You talked about a lot of numbers throughout the course of this, and I was able to, after you gave us this monthly report, to pick those out pretty easily. The one thing I would like to say is I would love to see, and I hope that we are going to see something like this as we move forward with the Windjammer project, because you talked about, yeah, we brought some numbers here, we brought some there, and you kind of had all the pieces, but we didn't have them together. And so having something that gives us an ongoing bottom line like this report, I think, is going to be an invaluable resource. We just heard that, yeah, we might have dropped the ball on communications, but if we can move forward in this venue, I think that we can learn from this experience. So thank you.
Councilor Watson?
Thank you. For the rates, so going from the September 16 estimate that was based on the 121 million, and then going down to a January 18 estimate. Oh, I'm sorry, slide 56. So that the rate, even though we between September 16 and January 18, we know we're going to have to execute more SRF loans than we thought. I'm assuming, right? Then when that rate study was done in September 16, we did not think we were going to have to execute 20 more million, basically ask for more 24 million from the SRF loans and take that loan. The rate was able to decrease because of the interest rate. Is that right? Is that how that was able to happen?
Interest rate and the grants that were obtained.
So we obtained more grants between September 16 and January 18?
We received in 2017, we received,
I'm sorry, you probably had it on there and I just
29 million something.
blanked on that one.
we received the .09 grant of $1 million.
Okay.
We also received in 2016, 2.4 million from Department of Ecology in the grant.
Okay.
Yes, but at the time that I think 16 was being done, I wasn't here, so I don't know. But I'm assuming they were looking at a second bonding issue, so at a higher
When that rate
interest
study was done, they were looking at other
Yeah.
financing. Okay.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure that I understood how that was able to all pencil out. Yes, and then as far as Windjammer going forward, with the Windjammer presentation that you're going to give us and the numbers and ask for us to approve, I would like to see clearly broken out what exactly is part of the mitigation and part of that would go into this specific project, the sewer treatment plant project, and then what is extra. I want to see clearly defined, like what we're approving is. Actually, I'd like to do it separate if I could. I don't know how you're going to present that to us or what that agenda bill will look like, but maybe just a summary of this is solely mitigation and what has to happen with the construction side of it total, and then what would be extra out of the general fund or other park funds that we have, just so that I can delineate very clearly and easily what we're paying for from where and what the ratepayers are going to end up paying for and how that all shakes out. My slide that I appreciate on this is slide 36. That's kind of what I asked for, and going forward, and I think that's part of the miscommunication that we've talked about, is I wish we would have had this for all the GMPs. Like what we've thought, or what the construction companies and what you guys have thought the estimate would be, but then no, it either went down or up, because we know it has fluctuated throughout the whole project. And we can't play Monday morning quarterback, but looking back, this is exactly I think what we need, and so I appreciate that, and I hope to see that going forward. I didn't look all the way through the packet, but to see sort of where we're at with these projections. That was sort of my biggest problem I guess I see with this process is the estimating not being so accurate and not able to be accurate as things fluctuate during this process. That's sort of been my my problem with this, because it's so hard for us as council member to go to the public with answers and timely answers, and you know, fielding those questions is definitely, it's hard to do with this type of process. So that's been, I appreciate this slide, and I hope to see continuing on this path, and like council member Bill said, to continue that through the Windjammer Park too, so we can keep real updated on how costs are fluctuating in funding sources. So that's all I have for now.
Thank you.
One more quick thing I wanted to revisit. I had written it down here just because it was an impressive number. I know, Patricia, you talked about the average loan going from, you know, the anticipated 6% to 3.5%. But I was looking at these numbers and I jotted some down, and I think it's a truly amazing figure that we got just under $90 million in loans at under 2% financing, and I think that's what really saved us in the end. I know one of the first things that the first questions I had when we heard an additional 20 million is, what is this going to do with rates, and 2 rates for everyone in the city, and that is an impressive figure, and I really think that that's a large part of what saved our bacon. So I just wanted to mention that as being pretty outstanding as well.
Well, I just thank you, council, and thank you, staff. Nice, good presentation. I'm not done yet. I'm gonna be following this every day, as you well know. The one thing that I have asked of staff is that we have absolutely no more surprises. We look at these numbers often, and if there's going to be a change, and there still could be, with this final Windjammer process that we'll be going through the rest of this month, we'll get a better handle on that, and it should be done as far as pricing. We don't think that price of 141 million will fluctuate much, but it could fluctuate some. It could still go a bit higher. It could be a bit lower, but believe me, I'm going to keep my eye on the ball. I'm embarrassed to say that the accounting system we had was not robust enough, probably until sometime in 2017. And we started this project in 2015. So, you know, I blame us for that. We didn't get our act together until 2017, as it pertains to the accounting system that we were using for this project. So that was a big mistake, and I am concerned about a couple things yet, and Councilor Heisen touched on it. The RCW requires an audit. I'd like to know the details, the real details of that audit. Who's really being audited? How is that going to work? What's it going to look like? I know that we're paying for it, and I think we have, as you call it, contingency for that, or a placeholder for that. So I'd like to know more about that and what it is. And then finally, I don't know whether I heard this wrong, or you talked about our cost changes, Joe, and the fact that you had a 1-inch thick pile of cost changes. Is that for the entire project thus far?
This is 1 month.
Okay, so
We have over 700 of these individual contract
okay,
cost
Cost change memorandum.
yeah.
okay, but you cannot tell us whether that's up or down.
Well,
You did
each-
say it goes both ways, but I'd like to know what the cost changes amount.
If you'd like, we can. I think this is probably the wrong venue to go through.
Yeah.
But if you'd like, we can sit down and go through them and figure. If you want to bring that forward at another workshop, we can do that.
I just think it's an important part of this. It's a big,
It's
long
interesting and hard to
process.
explain.
Yeah, I can imagine if that's 1 month. So, okay. Anyway, again, complicated project. I think the thing for the viewers to know is we're going to complete the project. I've already asked staff if there's anything we don't have to build. Can we save some money? Been convinced that we need to complete the project as we have it planned. We will have a fine asset there for years and years and years to come, and we are communicating with the NAS. We'll see. Don't know which way that's going to go yet, but we're certainly going to continue that process. We have it funded. It will continue to work for many, many years in the future, but, and we'll get through it. Councilor Heisen?
Just a couple of closing thoughts before we go. Councilmember Wiesner had a great point about the closure of Windjammer and choosing our timing and projects carefully, because if we close it before we need to use that space, or keep it closed while we're not using that space, that's not going to go over well, especially in the summertime with people that want to be down there. So everybody wants something new and pretty, and they want all the things, but nobody wants the inconvenience of that transitional period. So the least painful we can make that, the better, and the more we can communicate with the public, the better. And I know that this is obvious to you, but I want to assure those watching that we want to use the park just as much as everybody else does. So that will be done as prudently and considerately as possible. And also for anyone watching and or taking notes, Jesse, I'm looking at you. I think that something that I cannot emphasize enough are these rates. People, they latch onto this monthly rate, and some of those numbers are scary, but it's so impressive to me that when we thought the plant was going to be 120 million in March of 16, our long range estimated 2021 monthly sewer rate was 135, and we've gone up 20 million to 140, and yet that same projected sewer rate has gone down to 110 a month. So when people see this price increase and automatically associate it with the recent sewer increase, I think it's really important to note that number is actually going down as the cost of the plant goes up. And to me, that is nothing short of astonishing. And, as a ratepayer, I appreciate that. And I think that's something that we need to emphasize to other ratepayers, that we really are doing our best. And I'm impressed with the work that you've done. So that's all I have.
One quick question for you too. When we get into moving the stockpile, I know much of it goes around the building, and there's probably going to be some that's going to go even other areas in there. When you get to the point of giving us a presentation at the workshop, I would really like to know if it's necessary to actually deposit that material throughout the entire shaded point parts that you had on your presentation, or maybe that's one of the areas that we could salvage in terms of cost and put emphasis in other improvements. I don't know what the quantities are on the trade-off on that, but that's something that's worth a discussion, because if there is a rational reason not to disturb that entire park, that would have less impact on the public using it. And I understand the timing with the weather. You can't plant grass in July and August and all that kind of stuff. We'll have a mess on our hands. But I would like to have that discussion before we get too deep into just burying the park in the spoils that are left out there.
Okay.
Okay. So any other council questions or business? Seeing none, I guess we'll adjourn. Thank you.
Thank you.